This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
A meeting of the minds about Ebola and Memphis City pensions revisited. All that and more coming up on Behind the Headlines. Welcome to Behind the Headlines. I'm Pierre Kimsey, sitting in for Eric Barnes, who's on assignment. Joining us at the round table this week is Les Smith from Fox 13 News, Andrew Douglas from Action News 5, and the venerable Jackson Baker from the Memphis Flyer. Starting off the program, we go to a subject that's been on a lot of people's minds lately, and that's Ebola. This past Monday, there was something of a debrief about this area's current state of readiness. Andrew, give us an idea of what was covered at this meeting.
Right. So Tennessee Senator Lamar Alexander spoke to a number of different doctors and had kind of a panel of health leaders and doctors in Memphis and Shelby County to determine how ready is this area if there were an Ebola outbreak in Memphis and Shelby County. And so there were a lot of discussions. One of the discussions was having maybe an area where if someone came in the emergency room and they came in with these symptoms, that there would be one location where they would be housed and isolated from the rest of the area. Instead of having all hospitals ready, you would have one location, and the thought was to perhaps have one location in 300 designated communities across the country. And so it was an interesting discussion, but here we are about 2 weeks or so from a midterm election, and politics was brought into it. Memphis Congressman Steve Cohen talked about the risk being a little greater in Tennessee because Governor Bill Haslam didn't expand Medicaid. And so as a result, Tennesseans are perhaps more at risk if there were a virus outbreak. And you would think that Ebola would be an apolitical issue, but here we are less than 2 weeks before the midterm elections, and politics is everywhere, no matter what you discuss.
Well, were the doctors that were assembled there, I mean, there were some real experts in the room, people who deal with infectious diseases. Did they give us any real idea, or was it really did it just turn political real quick?
Well, there was a discussion about perhaps having kind of a two-tier system where you have one tier of these hospitals, these designated communities, 300 or so around the country, and having another tier, a top tier, like Emory University in Atlanta, Omaha, Nebraska, Maryland. That would be the top tier that would actually deal with diagnosis and treatments and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So there was talk of having kind of a two-tier system, and talk about outbreaks and that sort of thing, and federal funding, which would be in the $15 to $17 million range when it came to building these community centers across the country, 300 of them. So it was an interesting discussion from that part, from that standpoint.
You know, it's kind of an interesting thing. Many years ago, around 2001, Les and I were working together over at Fox 13. I remember you went to the Pentagon right after 9/11 and saw the devastation there. And I was thinking back about the way people felt around 9/11. And people were almost convinced that there was going to be some sort of biological attack at that point.
Right.
And I remember that Bill Frist had a big gathering on the state level. And of course, we all went there to see it, and it was very, very short on what actually was going to happen. Yeah. And I think it's because everybody was formulating their plans, but there seemed to be a kind of a general consensus at the time that Memphis was ready in case something was about to happen.
Well, we got that feeling too. There was another event this week that was more or less headed up by Mayor Luttrell. It included the county officials, health officials, Yvonne Madlock and Helen Morrow, among others. And they talked specifically about they have been prepared for more than a decade, since, a matter of fact, about the time of 9/11 and after, for any type of catastrophic event, whether it be weather, whether it be epidemic disease or whatever. And so they wanted to assure the public that the county is aware, has plans in place for emergency situations. They also had the new EMA preparedness officer there in Dale Lane. He was there and talked about it. So they wanted to let people know that Shelby County is prepared. Do not panic. We are prepared. Things are in place. Emergency operations are set up. And so that goes back to what you were saying. They've been prepared because 9/11 had that much of an impact on people and on cities and communities. And so it kind of makes you feel good they responded like that.
There is, however, an obvious conclusion you can draw from all this. People are more concerned about Ebola as a menace than they are ISIS. ISIS has never really set into people's minds, except theoretically. That is a political issue more than anything else. But it is something like a deadly infection would be a potential weapon, and it scares a lot of people. But it's Lamar Alexander. By the way, I think he will appreciate your calling him Tennessee Alexander at election time.
I know.
Lamar Alexander pointed out, look, we've had one Ebola death in the United States. We're going to have 30,000 deaths from the flu. Yes. Let's put things in proportion.
Yeah, that's been one thing that the health department has said like a mantra. The first time that they got the press all together in that room, they said, this is all fine and good, and we're glad that you're interested in Ebola, but go get your flu shot.
And they were also talking about just a few years ago, I believe it was 2009, when we had the H1N1 pandemic and the swine flu, and everyone was concerned about that, but they talked about how Shelby County was very prepared, and there was national coverage about the preparedness here and how we were ready and prepared. But, preparing for these type of things, it's an ongoing issue. It's something that you have to constantly update and get the latest information on. And so they're doing that here, or at least it seemed that way during this type of panel discussion. So it's very interesting.
And our job in the media, too, is to not feed into frenzy. We should come at this based on facts, based on not on projections or someone's, the public's general fear of epidemics and diseases. So, just a reminder, I think we've tried to do that. I know every one of our organizations has. Just get the information out, and so the public will be prepared if and when this were to happen.
Right. We'll keep that in mind as we watch this evolving story. Well, early voting is underway, and there are a number of amendments that the voters will have to sift through. Jackson Baker, who is scrutinizer of all things political, has a preview of what we can expect. Give us an idea, kind of, because there are going to be some voters who walk into that voting booth and they see all these amendments and they're going to be lost.
Well, there's a lot of confusion. There are 4 amendments, 3 of which are really major and transformational, and all of them have generated some confusion. The one that has generated least confusion is Amendment number 3, which is basically to abolish the income tax as a possibility for all time in Tennessee. I think people kind of grasp that. But there's an incredible amount of confusion about Amendment number 1, which has to do with the abortion issue, which is a very volatile thing. And because it is worded in a very semantically acute way, and the various ads on either side of the issue also are employing semantics to full effect, people are even more confused. Basically, what it says, what Amendment number 1 says, is if it passes, then the state Supreme Court decision of the year 2000, which provided more protection for abortion rights in Tennessee than exist in the nation at large, nullifying what had been a Tennessee statute calling for a 72-hour waiting period, requiring parental consent, which we still do, and a couple of other severe restrictions. It cut those out. Basically, Tennessee is something of an abortion-friendly state in that sense, and that's what the opposition is claiming, that it's too abortion-friendly. The confusion is engendered by some of the language in there, because the famous phrase, rape, incest, and threat to the life of the mother, or words to that effect, are at the end of that amendment. And a lot of people look at that amendment and think, well, this is pro-abortion. Actually, it is neither pro nor anti-abortion. It is, although both sides will play it however they want to play it, it basically puts Tennessee in a neutral state, is what the amendment says. It uses the word neutral. And it removes those protections that were there. And allows the legislature to legislate on various issues that it was prevented from doing. So the opponents of the amendment point out that if there should be a sea change on the United States Supreme Court, Tennessee would be in a position to nullify abortion altogether here. That's what they're really up in arms about. The people on the other side say, look, we're making Tennessee too abortion friendly as it is. It's a very volatile issue. So basically, to really summarize this and keep it really simple, if you vote yes for amendment number 1, you are giving the legislature the authority to impose restrictions on abortion that are not permitted right now, according to the 2000 State Supreme Court decision. If you vote no, you are leaving things in status quo, and the existing state of affairs will continue. Amendment number 2, judicial appointments is also an issue that has generated some confusion because basically it affects only appellate judges, and the Supreme Court being, of course, an appellate court. It doesn't affect the state judges we just voted on. We'll keep on voting on those in direct elections as we did this year, every 8 years. The governor has been appointing appellate judges based on recommendations he's gotten from a judicial commission, which is lawyers and recently other kinds of people too. But he's received recommendations, got names, he can take the names or ask for new names. This amendment would knock out the judicial commission. It would leave something like the Tennessee plan in effect where the governor makes the appointments, but it would add a role for the legislature. Both houses of the legislature would have to approve the appointments. They have 60 days to reject them. If they do nothing in 60 days, it's like a pocket veto. The appointments are good. It's a compromise between people who liked the Tennessee plan as it was, giving lawyers actually more of an input that they have in the amendment. But it is a block. The people who prefer the amendment say it blocks the possibility of direct election. If this amendment fails, the legislature is free to impose any system it wants because the Constitution is vague enough right now that they can call for a direct election. So if this amendment passes, it prevents that from happening. The governor will have the appointment power, the legislature will have a veto power, there will not be direct elections. And the people the proponents of Amendment 2 say this will keep money, big money, and politics per se out of judicial appellate appointments. And that's what's really involved here. Number 3, I've already spoken to. If you don't like the idea of an income tax, you vote yes. If you think, wait a minute, we should not close off our options, you vote no. And I think that amendments 1 and 2 are somewhat controversial. Frankly, I think number 3, given what has happened in the state when they tried to pass the income tax, it's got a fairly easy road to passage. Number 4, gaming for veterans groups. That's all. Flip a coin.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and it'll be interesting to see if one of those amendments, particularly a controversial issue like abortion, and then an income tax issue, would bring out certain sectors of voters. Midterms are always traditionally lower turnout than presidential elections.
Right.
But you wonder with these 2 issues, these volatile issues, we're seeing a lot of ads on TV about, especially 1, perhaps a little bit of 2, but 1 and 3 in particular from this political observer seem to be ones that could generate various voting blocks coming out.
Well, we will certainly watch that, and I know you'll be watching that, Jackson. Well, if past history is any indicator, the Memphis City Council is never in a hurry to jump into anything having to do with pensions, but earlier this week during a committee meeting, they plunged right into it, didn't they, Les?
Yeah, this whole thing, where once we had one plan for all of the health care and all of the pension reform and the pension deficit. Now there are 2 plans, at least there are 2, as opposed to what was once before. In June, remember, it was all hardcore. They passed by a 7-5 narrow margin this plan from Mayor A.C. Wharton that was draconian in terms of cuts to health care and pensions for city employees. Now, after unending debate and unending discussion. This has now been narrowed down, and a new horse has also been thrown into this by Councilman Myron Lowry. So what you've got is a plan from Mayor A.C. Wharton, which he calls a hybrid plan. In this particular case, it's more focused on people who are 10 years in service or under, okay? And that, of course, you'd have to kick in some money. The taxpayers would be willing to pay, according to the Wharton proposal, something like 2% or whatever on a 401A plan for retirement. There'd also be an annuity thrown in, and all of this would apply to those employees, which would leave the rest of everybody else, the veteran union people and employees, on their own and leave it the way it is. And in Myron's plan, it starts with new hires, and it would only apply to new hires. But the fact is this, none of this addresses the deficit, the pension
problem.
deficit of $500 million. And what happened to that? I mean, you've got a choice here. And as somebody talked about it or stated earlier this week, now you got to decide if you're a Memphis City Council member, are you going to throw a pebble at this, you going to throw a rock at this, or a boulder at trying to knock down this pension deficit thing? And it looks more and more like we're going to go and opt for the slingshot rock and try to go after the Goliath of pension with that every year. I don't know.
Well, you ask what happened. Politics is what happened.
Yeah.
And politics is based on people's perceived needs. And the fact is, we're talking about pensions. A lot of people take jobs because of the pension arrangements. That's the case that's been made for leaving things as they are. I don't think we're going to leave things as they are. Hybrid is the best that the mayor has come up with, and it may be that we end up with that because it goes both ways.
Yeah, it goes both ways. And a little bit, at least what it does is at least brings more possible tools to the toolkit in terms of what the council can decide upon and look at as possibilities.
And certainly the city council has got to think about the Tennessee comptroller and what they said to him and what they said to that whole body, saying, hey, listen, you guys got to get your books in order or we're going to make the decisions for you. And so they have, that's in the back of their head, whether they admit it or not.
Yeah. Well, it looks like it's sizing up to be the defining fight of the city council.
And the fact is that it really is a reprieve probably for all city employees, because by the time either one of these plans voted on, the implementation of it might not take place until 2016. So,
oh my goodness. Well, also another body that we've been taking a look at, in fact, there was an observation that was made at this table some time ago that it used to be that we would see all the trench warfare coming out of the Memphis City Council, and now it seems to be coming out of the county commission.
They're in foxholes.
Right. And one of the things that we were talking about before the show is that there's been a kind of a dynamic change in the personalities in the cast of players out there. Tell us a little bit about what's been going on lately.
Yeah, it started off on a bad note, which began with trying to pick a chairman. Steve Baser, Republican, had just been elected to a full term, and he thought that he had it pretty much. He had the numbers. He thought he had the 7 votes with his Republican colleagues, and he was going to become the next chairman. He had been the vice chairman under James Harvey, the previous chair, who was a Democrat, but he was, of course, term limited out. But then there's intrigue and everything else. It's like the House of Windsor or Tudor or something, and all of a sudden Justin Ford emerges as the actual chairman of the commission. This in a straight vote against the old veteran of Walter Bailey. Bailey has not taken this lying down, and he continues to try to fight this. He wanted to fight Justin Ford's ability to make selections for committee chairmen and all of that.
And all of this comes
terrible.
Yeah, all of this comes out of the fact that Bailey believes that, well, and there might be some evidence that you can present to that, but Bailey believes that Ford made a deal with the Republicans in order to get the chair.
There's no question that Justin Ford voted fairly consistently with the Republicans, more consistently than any other Democrat last time, in the previous commission, along with James Harvey, which is one reason James Harvey got to be chairman. He gratified the Republicans. Justin Ford was the lesser of two evils for the Republicans. They knew a Democrat would be elected. They had Walter Bailey and they had Justin Ford. Walter Bailey never votes with them. Right. Justin Ford does consistently. So you call it a deal or you call it just an obvious kind of common sense decision. They ensured the election of Justin Ford. Walter Bailey did not want to take that lying down. He's been trying consistently to overturn not just the appointments of Justin Ford as chairman, the committee appointments, which we've talked about before. The people who support Justin Ford at this point are worried that if there's a rules change, which came up yesterday in County Commission, lowering the threshold for getting things on the agenda from a supermajority, having to have 9 votes, to merely a majority. They're worried that a rules change might come before the commission deposing Justin Ford altogether, or or nullifying pretty much what he wants to do. They got their 7 votes yesterday, but the opposition was ready for them. They had to have 8 because there was 1 absentee yesterday. They didn't get that last vote. This is not going away. They're going to keep bringing this back up. It may be post-Christmas before Justin Ford knows whether he really could stay in control of this commission.
And you know, this county commission divide, it doesn't bode well for Shelby County overall. You have alliances, you have perceived deals, you have, you know, this infighting, disrespect, discontent, all this talk. You know, it's not an episode of Survivor, although it feels that way sometimes. That way, yes. These are elected commissioners that are elected to do the work of Shelby County, and they're going to have some various issues that are very important: taxes, schools, education, you name it. When it comes up, you know, that's why people are so discontent with politics, is because of these deals and these alliances, when they should really say, okay, how do we move Shelby County forward? You have a vision, I have a vision, let's talk about it, let's come up with a compromise.
And they've got a situation, an important vote coming up, because there are going to be amendments to at least proposed by the Luttrell administration, amendments to the employee health care plan. They have an $11 million shortfall because of the Affordable Care Act that they've got to meet. So they've got to save money somewhere. So they're going to proposing at least to raise co-pays for their employees, among other things, cut out spouses who have employees that could afford health care, all of those things, which they think will save about $4 million there in that particular case. But all this comes just days before open enrollment, and you're asking employees to make a decision on these things within a matter of days on some very important stuff, and you're asking the county commission to make a vote on it on Monday.
I was impressed, however, with the discussion on that yesterday, because they pretty much got to a compromise position on the main sticking point, the spouse out, it's called. Yeah. A surcharge may be imposed to keep spouses on the insurance. But it's amazing. What's interesting to me is they're just a little bit behind the curve vis-a-vis the city council on this issue. The city council's already been there.
Yeah, already been there and done that.
They're catching up.
Yeah.
Here.
Well, you indicated, or I indicated earlier about the change of dynamics in terms of personalities on the commission. Who have you been keeping an eye on?
Listen, the real power on the Republican side is Heidi Schaefer, whom we've had on this show. She's sharp as a tack. She calls a lot of the shots behind the scenes, and she is one that made sure there were enough votes there yesterday to keep that rules change from occurring. She's a personality to watch. Justin Ford, he will take some of his cues from what his supporters want. On the other side, Bailey is asserting himself. He's not venerable. He's venerable. And he knows he is, and he thinks he thought he was entitled to be chairman after all these years. And he's going to be the major force consistently on the Democratic side.
And where does Steve Baser fit in on all
Steve
that?
Baser is still trying to play free radical. Now, Les and I were talking yesterday in the meeting. Mike Ritz had that role in, in the last couple of years. Baser wants that role where he can vote with the Republicans when he wants to and play with the Democrats when he wants to, and be independent and maybe prepare a mayoral race in the city. He's been thinking about that. But does he have the gravitas yet? He has yet to establish that.
Well, in the minute left in the show, I just wanted to get back to elections on one thing: the key races that you're looking at.
The one key race that is actually contested is the U.S. Senate race. That's Lamar Alexander, the aforesaid Lamar Alexander, and Gordon Ball. Democrats don't stand much of a chance in statewide races these days, but Gordon Ball is to some degree self-financing, is a fairly decent candidate, and Lamar Alexander is not fully supported by the Republican Party. He got only 49% in the primary, if it's enough to win. So this could be closer than people think. Right now, Alexander is ahead in the polls. The smart money says he will win, but Gordon Ball is going to be coming through the state. It's going to be coming through here this week, and making a pitch. And again, he's a fairly decent candidate. He has some appeals to the Tea Party, even on Common Core, which he opposes, for example. So we'll see what happens. That's going to be a race to watch.
That's interesting, because you wouldn't think of a Democrat playing to the Tea Party crowd.
Well, on a couple of issues he does.
There's certainly a lot of ads for it, but I don't know anybody that really thinks that he could beat Lamar Alexander.
It's a rough go.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank the panel for a nice discussion today, and I want to thank you at home for tuning in. Join us next week. Thanks.